You
the
acknowledge
particulars.
they've ruled against Trump on tariffs, against him on deploying the National Guard. There's like 40% or so of the rulings are unanimous. There's actually a lot of bipartisan consensus, and it's not a partisan court.
I mean,
with these
Hitler
conservatives.
killed
You might disagree
Hitler.
with them.
I mean,
but
I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that.
how do you fight somebody like Trump, who you say is authoritarian, with authoritarian suggestions of your own, like packing a high court?
There are 9 votes on the Supreme Court, and Republicans get 2 free spaces on every major decision.
I mean, he is low IQ, in my opinion. Like, the reason he was even going off about the Supreme Court because he was saying that black people had their right to vote taken away in Louisiana.
Well, we're around to find out. Like, that's kind of what's going to happen. What do you expect? What I'm saying is that Trump is in the around find out phase.
You create this sort of like air of desperation that you know, kind of sounds a bit like the manifesto from the shooter at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Like,
I want to talk about the Supreme Court a little bit, because this is a big subject of discussion after a very controversial ruling about the Voting Rights Act and its modern day interpretation that was handed down. But now you have Democrats, many of them have for a while now clamored to pack the Supreme Court, to add additional justices specifically to skew the ideological bent of the court and remove it as a meaningful check on their power, or what they can do when they retake control. And now apparently even the leaders of the Democratic Party are open to the idea. So here is Hakeem Jeffries being asked about court packing, and here's how he responded. Listen to this.
In the new Congress, we're going to have to do something about this Supreme Court. And let me be very clear. Everything is on the table. Everything to deal with this corrupt MAGA majority that is issuing political opinions that are designed to bolster the prospects of the Republican Party, and we will not allow them to succeed.
So President Trump responded to this by calling Hakeem Jeffries a low IQ individual and pointing out that he said the Supreme Court is illegitimate. Trump writes on Truth Social, after saying such a thing, isn't he subject to impeachment? I got impeached for a perfect phone call. Not sure that's quite how I remember it, but okay. Where are you, Republicans? Why not get it started? They'll be doing this to me. I mean, Destiny, members of Congress can't, in fact, be impeached. That's not a thing. I would have hoped that Trump would know that. But it is concerning to me, and that's ridiculous that he's trying to get someone removed for saying this. But I mean, do you support packing the Supreme Court? Do you agree that this is a MAGA Supreme Court? Because that's not my read on it at all.
I think the Roberts is just completely and totally unhinged. Reading the leaked papers that I think were published on the New York Times for kind of the start of the whole shadow docket business, that was just unbelievable to me. Unfortunately, I haven't read the last opinion yet. I don't have enough alcohol in my house at the moment to go through a whole 90 pages authored by Alito, because holy Christ, that's going to be inducing. But some of the decisions and some of the completely contrary reasoning that have come from this court are just astounding to me. You'd have to get into
But do you acknowledge
particulars.
they've ruled against Trump on tariffs, against him on deploying the National Guard? There's like 40% or so of the rulings are unanimous. There's actually a lot of bipartisan consensus, and it's not a partisan court.
I mean,
with these
Hitler
conservatives.
killed
You might disagree
Hitler.
with them.
I mean,
but
I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. Yeah, there have been things that even this court has not ruled in Trump's favor for, but I mean, like, they basically axed part of the 14th Amendment. They gave Trump immunity, the president, from all crimes. It seems like they've given him a pass on
they didn't
a lot
give
of
him.
behavior.
That's not. They didn't give him immunity from all crimes.
did.
That's an oversimplification
It's not.
of
They
the
did.
ruling.
They did.
They said that the exercise of core presidential powers, you have immunity for, but there's things
Without
that you
defining
don't have
what those
immunity for.
are and leaving
I mean,
the definition broad enough that essentially anything could come under that.
It'll all have to be fleshed out, but it's just, so when you're demonizing the Supreme Court as a MAGA court, even though there's this vast ideologically diversity on it, I mean, actually the Supreme Court is one of the only institutions in America that is running relatively well, like much better than Congress, much better than the presidency. And yet you have Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries, but even to his left flank, the people that are saying, stack it with judges. How do you fight somebody like Trump, who you say is authoritarian, with authoritarian suggestions of your own, like packing a high court, Steve?
I think that there are really good reasons why the Supreme Court should be reformed. I think that we should have at least one judge per circuit. I think that makes sense. And I think that we should have some kind of term limit on judges so that we have a more regular appointing of judges by the president. I think it's really weird that one president could have 0 and the next could have 4. That seems to be really silly.
But that's different from court packing.
I agree. I think that to the chagrin of my more left friends, I don't think I would necessarily be in favor of like, let's just throw 5 judges on the court. I think I would be in favor of a wink wink court packing, but done as like a part as a part of a larger like court reform package, basically. Like, yeah. Also, to say this is not a partisan court, there are 9 votes on the Supreme Court, and Republicans get 2 free spaces on every major decision. That's kind of crazy. Okay, that's a little bit
I think
crazy.
I would be much more open if your argument is that Alito and Thomas are like MAGA justices. I would be much more open to that.
Well,
but
yeah, no, they are. That's what I'm saying. But like, you get 2 freebies. You have
but what I'm saying is Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, John Roberts, they're all independents, and they do not just do whatever Republicans. In fact, I see so much hate from Republicans for those justices. Blaire, I'll bring you in here. Sorry.
Yes, like one of the things that Trump has been bitching about the most is that, so many aspects of his agenda have not been able to go through because of the Supreme Court. So to pretend as if it's a MAGA court, I don't really agree with. And I also agree that it's one of the few institutions that I have like a little bit of faith in currently still right now. Hakeem Jeffries, he is low IQ in my opinion. Like the reason he was even going off about the Supreme Court because he was saying that Black people had their right to vote taken away in Louisiana. It's completely insane. And it's also, just to kind of tie it into the rest of the topics we've been going through here, like that's also the stuff that like, I'm not going to sit here and say that's a direct, inciting of violence or anything. But when you create like a climate and a culture where people really genuinely think that their basic fundamental rights are being taken away, even when they're not, you create this sort of like air of desperation that kind of sounds a bit like the manifesto from the shooter at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, like this sort of like other world they're living in where all of their rights are being taken away and everything's coming crashing down, and they may feel a desperation to do something. I'm not going to say Hakeem was directly inciting there, but I think that overall, I don't like the sort of like, we talk about the extreme things Republicans say that Trump says. I also don't like the extremity on the other side where it's like gay people are getting thrown in camps, Black people can't vote anymore, women are losing their right to vote. Like all those things create this climate that I also don't want to live in because it leads to other things.
Because, Stephen, like sometimes when we talk about this extreme rhetoric, and I think progressive commentators have a point about this, they say, well, it's not Democrat elected officials, it's just commentators and TikTokers. But when it comes to this kind of thing, it very much is Democratic elected officials who make hyperbolic doomsday rhetoric, like they're doing Jim Crow 2.0, like they're trying to get rid of the 19th Amendment with the SAVE Act, like they're trying to stop married women from voting. These things that have very minimal basis in reality and are obviously hyperbolic. And I agree, they're not like actual incitements of violence, but they are bringing up the temperature, which, yes, I understand you're going to say Trump does even more so when he calls people traitors and treasonous and says they're going to destroy the country and all that. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right for Democratic leaders to do
This is what I would say, okay? If I go to an event, okay, and some conservative guy, shows up, and he manages to sneak up on me and he punches me or whatever because of the shit that I talk online, I would be upset, but I would get it, right? I'm a very inflammatory figure. I understand that's the speech that I engage in. Somebody might show up in real life and want to, beat the shit out of me or whatever. I get that. I accept that to some extent. Obviously, I report it to the police, but like I'm choosing to engage in the way that I do, understanding that this might be the result of what happens. If you're worried that Democrats are fear-mongering, and then on the other side of that, Donald Trump is talking about revoking the citizenship from people in Congress that he doesn't like. What the fuck am I supposed to say about that? Like, yeah, Democrats are going a little bit far on the other side, but like, holy does Donald Trump not literally give them the easiest layups in the world for this? And nobody on the Republican Party seems interested in contradicting him here. So,
do you think the flip side of that also, though, is that because Democrats and progressives cry wolf all the time, that when Trump actually is saying crazy shit or it actually is getting a little dystopian, the public has been desensitized to that because people were marching over the Handmaid's Tale outfits in the first term over relatively benign things?
Yeah, you're preaching my song. Yeah, I complain about this shit for ever. People have been calling Trump a fascist for 500 years, and I think it's the stupidest thing in the world. But now, I think in this term, 100% Trump operates in almost an indistinguishable manner from a fascist who is trying to leverage whatever tools he can in our democratic republic, and to bend him in his favor. But it kind of loses any point of saying it when people have been calling him a fascist for a decade. I mean, I do agree with you there that there was way too much of that for too long. But liberals,
he still is also constrained by various checks and balances.
No, he's not.
He is abiding
barely.
by.
The Supreme Court has blocked like multiple things he's tried to do.
Yeah. So the tariffs would be an example I would use. right? And that they kind of blocked it in one way, and then Donald Trump immediately re-levied basically every tariff at a slightly lower percentage because he stated another way to do it. Right. This is not a meaningful check on power. The tariffs that he did do for a year.
It's a huge check. Trump is seething about having to return the money and about
that's fine that Trump is seething. He's not returning the money. I don't know where you got that from. That's funny, but I don't think we're ever getting that money back. So that means that Trump. What does it mean when the Supreme Court rules against him? They're essentially saying that this action was illegal. When I do something illegal, I would go to jail for it. I would imagine if you do something illegal,
that's not how it works. Biden lost at the Supreme Court for his student loans being illegal and other things.
Very true. And for that, we can have conversations about the shadow docket. We can talk about preliminary motions, because it's interesting that when Biden wanted to do the student loan forgiveness, all of a sudden, oh my God, what was that thing that we just got rid of? The nationwide injunction came out. One person sued and the whole Supreme Court was like, well, actually, hold on. We don't think the government can do this at all. We're going to enjoin their behavior from forgiving any student loans. And no student loans were forgiven before that Supreme Court decision went through. What happened with the tariffs? We'll let it stand. What is this? What about status quo? What about irreparable harm? All these elements for meeting the, what you would need for an executive stay or for a preliminary injunction.
Right, but I brought that up because you're saying
but
when something's illegal, I go to jail. But that's just not how it works with presidents.
But what I'm saying is that that all those examples are in my court, because Biden wanted to do the student loan forgiveness and that was stayed by the court. They said, no, hold on. You don't get to do any of that until we make a decision. For the tariffs, they were like, tariff them for a year or more and we'll make a ruling on it eventually. They ruled on it. They said, oh, that was illegal. But guess what? He got to tariff us. Our shit it's gone. We're never getting that money back.
I think we may get people may get some of the money back. We're still.
I'll bet you $20 on it publicly
litigated.
right now. I'll give you 2-to-1 odds. If you're right, I'll give you $40. If I'm right, you give me $20. We're never getting tariff money back.
If anyone gets paid a cent in tariff refund, I win the bet. Is what you're saying?
Over the past year and a half, yes, 1 cent. If you can show 1 cent going back from the government to any company,
like that it has or that it will.
That it has or will. Well, because a future ruling, maybe for the new tariffs, maybe will. But for the one that was just ruled on for the past year and a half, I don't think anybody's getting any money back. Absolutely not.
I don't know. I guess I can't say I've followed the whole refund debate super closely.
Right now.
I mean, sure, I don't care. It's just $20 is $20.
Let's go. Okay.
I'll take you on it. But
public accountability.
Blaire, I mean, your thoughts on all of this?
I guess I would just say that I think all of this, kind of what Destiny was mentioning about how people were calling Trump a fascist really preemptively before there was any sort of example of, any fascism happening, which I still think is a stretch. But I think that that's only indicative that everything everyone says on both sides, whether they're currently in power or not, does in fact matter. I think if you're summoning up the beast like that, you're almost pushing someone to become the thing that you're claiming they are. I think that has a basis in reality too. I mean, why is that so shocking?
Yeah,
you just gave the exact argument that I gave for why people are engaging with Trump in such a radical manner.
The only difference is I think it applies to everybody. But that's the thing is we have actually agreed on all of this. You just don't want to apply it to everybody all of the time. You think it's only towards one side.
No, okay. I'll say this one time, and I hate that I'm going to say this. Okay. I don't think there should be any political violence in this country. I condemn all political violence. Nobody should be killing anybody for political reasons. It's the United States of America. We can fucking vote. Especially the same people that tell you that you shouldn't vote or whatever, that are out killing people, is the dumbest thing in the world, okay? The problem, though, is that the violence is a predictable response to a person who is stoking violence. And there's no way to get over that or around that. I can scream at people all day and say, you guys shouldn't do this. It doesn't matter. Much the same that if I were to tell my community.
But what you're really saying when you say that is that side deserves it because of the words coming out of that side's mouths. That's really what you're saying. What you're really saying is not that it's predictable. You're not just analyzing. You're not being objective. You're saying Trump talks a lot of shit. So essentially, he's going to get hit. That's kind of what you're saying.
Deserves is
and I don't think that's true because there's a million things coming out of the left. Every day I log on social media and I'm seeing some leftists either death threatening me personally or going viral for saying President Trump should be shot. And in no part of my being am I like, this person realistically should have retaliation against them, legal perhaps. But
deserves is I understand what you're saying. Deserves is a strong word though, because it's a morally loaded term. But
that's kind of the implication that you're saying when you're constantly saying that it's expected.
I understand, but if I go up to a person on the street and say, I'm going to f your girlfriend, the guy's probably going to punch me in the face. Now, do I deserve it morally? No, you should be able to say whatever the f you want, aside from death threats, and not have somebody attack you for it. You should never get attacked for your speech. But if I told somebody that happened, they would say, well, f around and find out. That's kind of what's going to happen. What do you expect? What I'm saying is that Trump is in the around find out phase to where, should anybody be doing political violence? Absolutely fucking not. But should Hamas have done October 7th? No, that was a horrible fucking action. But give people no voice and no representation for decades and make their options seem increasingly, narrow. Yeah, that's going to happen. Obviously, like there are things that are going to happen in the world that shouldn't happen, but they're predictable outcomes of environments that we could otherwise change. That's the statement I'm trying to make.
But sometimes
And
you bring that up.
I think what makes it mostly predictable, and again, I just don't think it's only Trump's words that matter. Trump will do a Truth Social post once in a while and you see it, and on a certain percentage of those, you're like, wow, that's like a disgusting thing to say. Wow, that's like low-key dangerous. I can log on any social media app any day of the week. I can log on mainstream news any day of the week and see people on the left saying the same thing, if not worse. So again, I just think it applies to everybody. And until everybody's willing to make it apply to everybody, then we're going to be in this situation. And I don't think it's a both sides problem. If it was a both sides problem, the equivalent of a Charlie Kirk on the left would have been shot at by now. If it was a both sides problem, Biden would have got shot at once. And I'm so glad that's never happened. And I pray and I hope that never, ever happens. But it's really this,
we
it's
had 2
completely
lawmakers assassinated in Minnesota.
Sides.
There were 2 Minnesota state.
And I'll say this, as much as I can condemn what Trump says, if the consequences of his words were really that bad, then again, you would see this violence coming from his supporters towards people on the left at the same rate as it's happening the other way around. And it's just not happening.
They don't have to be violent. They see the state doing it on their behalf.
In what way?
In the alligator Alcatraz way, in the ICE way, in the way that Trump is trying to politically prosecute all of his opponents, in the way that Trump gave a pass and pardons anybody that commits crimes on his behalf. They don't need to commit violence. I
promise you what the actual sentiment on the right is that Trump is not doing nearly enough in terms of illegal immigration. Nobody on the right is like, no one's saying Trump's really fucking up the leftists or anything like that. That's really not.
That's not what I said. What I'm saying is that you don't feel like you have to go out and commit violence as a person on the right because Donald Trump is the president and he'll do it on your behalf. He's got you. He's got your back.
I mean, but it is meaningfully
my question
different.
Would be, one quick question then.
Sure.
Then why wasn't this sort of violence happening when Biden was in office, when actually people on the right did feel that was like, as someone, again, who's on the right and in those ecosystems and those algorithms, that's the peak hopelessness that I saw that people on the right felt, which, culminated in something like a January 6th. People were definitely down bad on the right. Why wasn't that level of violence happening towards the Biden administration?
Because it wasn't real. Because you guys hallucinated it. And you can see this over and over and over and over again. Oh my God. I know.
You can't just say something is not real because you don't want to confront it. I mean, that's really weird.
I remember when Dave Smith was on Piers Morgan and everybody was nodding along, all the conservatives were nodding along, when he said that we saw the worst oppression ever for conservatives in the year 2020 with the COVID lockdowns and with all the social media crackdowns. And seemingly, everybody forgot.
I think it was oppression for everybody. I think conservatives were just more keen to acknowledge it.
But Donald Trump was the president. Under Biden, all the lockdowns eventually ended. All of the social media companies lessened their policies.
Because they had already gone on for a year and a half. And I will agree he was president during that time.
I understand, but I'm just saying it was started under Trump. All of that started under Trump, the heaviest oppression of social media.
There was a gradient. And do you acknowledge that the redder the state was, the looser the constriction, the rules about COVID? I mean, it's not as if
possibly
it was Democrat governors. It was Democrat governors, and I lived in LA at the time. Up until 2022 was still masks and vaccine mandates and lockdowns coming in and out.
No,
whereas you go to in Alabama and they barely noticed anything.
There were not lockdowns coming in and out for.
Yes, there was. There was. They would impose the lockdowns, and then as time went on, about a year in, they would loosen it and then tighten it. Restaurants had to open and then close. Absolutely, they adjusted the rules back and forth. Where do you live?
At the time, I lived in Glendale, then I lived in Culver City, then I lived in Huntington Beach. I lived right next to Huntington Beach, the place that said, if you're vaccinated, you're not served here.
Well, also, Orange County was different than LA proper. Orange County and areas like that were also different than LA proper.
I think in the height of the COVID, which was still under Trump, there was kind of a back and forth. But I think once 21 rolled around, people started to slope them off in terms of the.
I don't know. A lot of schools were still closed. A lot of businesses had already been destroyed.
Sure, but there was also like a global pandemic. Like people didn't know what to do. It was hard to figure out how we were supposed to navigate that environment.
Right. Well, then do you forgive Trump for allowing the lockdowns? Then, did you like that he allowed them? And the states to make up their minds?
I thought that his leadership was poor during COVID because he constantly undermined and didn't seem to have any desire to assume like a federal leadership role. And then he undermined everything so much that when the one thing that I would give him credit for, I thought Operation Warp Speed was a really good idea, but I don't even know.
Oh boy, we're not doing COVID vaccine.
Exactly. Yeah, he can't even take credit for arguably the most successful thing that he did.
And that's the thing I hated the most that he did. So
Exactly.
you know what?
So-
Maybe we should end it on there.
Okay. We're putting a pin in it there. We are not doing a whole COVID vaccine debate. I appreciate both of you.
Hold on. Can I say one thing? Hold on. Because I've had good, okay, with Brad, and even with Blaire, despite fighting online, we've had, okay, a good back and forth. This is the thing that I don't like, okay, is that in the past, okay, and to a lot of people this feels fake, but in the past, this was true of members of our colleague class, whatever the fuck we do, punditry, and it was true of people in Congress. You go hard at each other on TV, and then when the cameras are off in Congress, you have to get together and work on doing shit to make the country work. That was the thing that had to happen. I feel like that environment has changed largely over the last 5 years especially, but over the last 10 years, mainly because of Trump and the whole MAGA idea that we could go from an era of, rattling each other online and then when it's offline, to Michael Knowles is tweeting out things asking for people like me to be arrested. When Donald Trump is arresting political opponents, like the environment has changed meaningfully. It's not good. I think in a way, I think it's disgustingly crazy that everybody is memeing the fuck out of Charlie Kirk's death. I think that's insane. I can't imagine for Erica Kirk, however much of a demon she might be, that's got to be the most and his children to see your dad constantly being turned into memes and on social media. That's insane
not a demon,
to me.
Well, I don't think she's
demonic.
a demon, and
She's
I think,
demonic. Sorry, not a demon, demonic. But I'm just saying
that I don't think she's demonic either.
How is she demonic?
You were on a roll until you said that. You really were, because that's actually what you're talking about. Is the dehumanization of people.
Dehumanization we can talk about. What I'm saying is that you can draw a straight line from the environment we're at now back to making fun of Paul Pelosi for his secret gay lover coming in.
I don't think the Paul Pelosi thing had the consequence.
And Mark Zuckerberg sending him to save the Fed, that all of these memes, I can't breathe, all of these memes coming out, all of the dehumanization, and the fact that it was celebrated from the top down, you could draw a straight line from there to now. And so it feels empty and hollow when conservatives want everybody to tone police themselves publicly now. But the president's been doing this forever. You guys have been doing it for the last 10 years. And I was like, well, what are we going to do?
My whole thing is, but Destiny, I don't want just you to tone police yourself. I don't want just Democrats to tone police yourself. I hold myself to the exact same standard. You're not going to catch me on the internet saying that anybody needs to be any range of violence done to them. So all I'm saying is I wish and I pray that you guys, and you in particular, I hope that you have that same principle that you hold yourself to. And I see that sometimes you do not, and a lot of people do not, but it's not about you guys holding yourself to a certain standard. That's my standard as well.
All right. Well, I think that's part of what we're trying to do here is actually have conversations, because sometimes there's more common ground. And even when there's not, I think talking is how you avoid the really bad stuff. And when we stop talking to each other, that's when really bad things happen. So I appreciate both of you guys taking the time for this conversation. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody for tuning in.